All right. Okay. So my name is Jenny Jen, and I'll be your moderator for the evening. I'm a first-year MD PhD student at Columbia University. And in the chat box, also helping us moderate will be Jeff Kim, and our volunteer live tweeting the event will be Sam Spellacy. I'd now like to have our wonderful panelists go around and introduce themselves. To be efficient, I'll call on you by name. So let's start with Mari.
Hi, everyone. Excuse me. I am Mari Valley. I'm a second year now at MSU Com, and I am a DO PhD student pursuing my PhD in the Department of Anthropology. So I'm going into medical anthropology, and I'm really interested in how public health and policy intersect with health outcomes and things like that.
Great, awesome. And Luke?
Hi everyone, my name is Luke Tsai, and like Jenny, I am a first year in the MD PhD program at Columbia University.
Awesome, and Chen?
Hi, I'm Chen. I'm a third year in the MD PhD program at UIC, and I study wound healing.
Awesome. And thank you so much to the panelists for being here. We're grateful you took the time out of your day to come virtually to our meeting to provide your wisdom. So for those of you who are going to step away or miss a piece of the session, as a reminder, we will have it recorded and posted on the APSA website. As the moderator, I will remind you to please submit your questions to the Q&A box, and we've already received the questions submitted during the registration process. We have Jeff behind the scenes collecting questions live, and you can also submit questions in the chat box or send them to Jeff's email address. If Jeff, you want to put in your physician scientist email, if you want to send it that way. So I think that's all the announcements that I have. Thank you again for all being here. And I'm going to go ahead and start with our first question. I wanted to note, based on the questions I saw that people submitted, I'll be focusing on questions around choosing a program and wait lists, but the panelist emails are available on the bio page that I sent out if you would like to reach out with other questions related to the application process. So let's get started. So the first question is, how did you choose your program? And this is a pretty broad question, but let's start with Chen.
So I guess there was two things really for why I chose UIC. The first one is that was the first school that accepted me. But more importantly, I really liked UIC just for the research that they did and for my own personal research interests. And then I really kind of compared how they treated interviewees, right? Like for the schools that kind of just, you know, oh, you're just another person that's coming here to interview. It kind of felt cold, but at least at UIC, I really felt like they were responding to all my questions, emailing me whenever I wanted. If there was even an indication that, you know, maybe I needed something else extra, they were more than happy to accommodate. So just for all those reasons, I kind of picked UIC. Yeah.
Great, awesome. Those are great reasons. Let's move on to Luke.
Sure. So some of the factors that were important to me included things like geography, and I think as Chen was mentioning, the type of research I'd be able to do. And Columbia was pretty much a perfect fit for both those both those considerations. And also going along with what Chen said, when I interviewed at Columbia, I was actually unable to make any of their formal interview days. And one of the program directors here took the time out of their day to basically give me a 1-hour orientation just for myself. And it was that kind of personalized treatment that I thought, you know, I really spoke to the values of the program. And it definitely also played a role in my decision to matriculate here.
Awesome. And finally, Mari.
Yeah, I had a couple of reasons for choosing MSU. Well, obviously the reasons that were mentioned are important, And for me, I did my undergrad here. And so that, and then similar to Luke said, there was a lot of kind of individuality and communication that went on with MSU that I really liked. And I was able to communicate with a lot of upperclassmen and have those resources a little bit to talk about what the program was like and actually, going through it. So that really helped me make my decision. I was very familiar with the program, and a couple other aspects where there's very few programs in the country that have social science dual degree programs. And so that obviously was really, really important and really cool that we actually had that right there. And I was taking a class with one of the anthropology professors, and they really helped me with my application process and spoke to a lot of committees for me. And so especially with the graduate application program, I think speaking to your advisors and making those connections is really important. And so having that was one of the big reasons that I chose MSU.
Great, awesome. So what I'm hearing is that obviously having programs that kind of allow you to explore your research interests is really important. And, selecting programs that really kind of show that they actively care about the students and, their needs and interests is really important as well. So moving on, so this next question is related to navigating waitlists. So how is the waitlist process like, and how do you plan out multiple waitlists and second looks? And so if you don't have experience with waitlists, you can also speak to navigating different multiple second looks and revisits. So let's start with Mari for this one.
I actually did my interviews and stuff pretty early, so I didn't really have too many experiences with waitlists. But just in terms of dealing with multiple schools and multiple communications that come in and not really knowing how that works, I definitely had an experience with that where I had an interview at Albany, and I didn't apply all dual degree programs, so this was just for a regular MD program. But I had an interview at Albany, and my mom was actually taking me to the airport. We were in the car when I got my MSU acceptance email. And so we turned around and went apple picking instead because they really said there's no need for me to fly to Albany because of a higher choice school accepted me. So there was a little bit of kind of preparing to waste a little bit of money in that aspect with the waitlist, just with plans that you have to make. And those travel plans was kind of something to keep in mind, I think. Like the spending isn't over just once the applications are submitted, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Luke?
To be honest, I don't have much experience navigating waitlists and things like that. But in terms of coordinating multiple second looks, my approach to that sort of consisted of just prioritizing certain schools if there were any conflicts. And there generally were not. I think among all the accepted students that I talked to, only a few institutions really clashed. But in general, it was relatively easy to arrange second looks that weren't conflicting in terms of schedule.
Great. And finally, Chen.
So in terms of waitlist, I guess I've had different experiences based on like when I applied. So I applied like multiple times, waitlisted first 2 years, waitlisted third year. What I recommend, if you're waitlisted at multiple institutions and let's say you have three and one of the three is really your top choice, I think it's worth, sending them an email, letting them know like, hey, you're my top choice. I'm currently waitlisted and waiting to hear back from other schools, but I would love to hear from you first and then give you reasons maybe, make sure you give your interview date as well. And something that I've been told kind of like off the books, and whether or not it's looked down upon, I don't really know. But if you get in somewhere else, right, and you have this offer, in my opinion, it's totally fine to email the school that maybe is your top choice that you're waitlisted at and tell them, hey, I just got accepted at program A, but I would really want to come here. Do you know like when I might be able to hear back? Because for accepting like positions, there's a deadline, right? For when you have to at least submit on like whatever the application portal is. Like, hey, I want to like come for second look. I want to like I hold on to this acceptance position. And so that's how I would navigate Waitlists. Just like be really forward with your intentions with each school. And generally, if they are like, a relatively responsive program, they'll get back to you pretty quickly and let you know. I personally had 4 schools when I kind of gave them a little push about the timeline. They told me, well, sorry, we can't accept you right now. I was like, that's fine, right? At least and then you can go from there. So.
Awesome. That's all very helpful advice. So this next question is kind of along that line, but what are some tips on maintaining communication with schools and how to email program directors about updates or anything that's changed since your application? So let's start with Loop this time.
I did not have any substantial updates to provide during my application process. What I've heard is some schools, certainly they have you upload those updates via their application portal. And if you do that, I would likely recommend that you reach out to the program coordinator just to let them know that you've made a change to your application in some respects. But yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have much insight to offer into that process.
Chen.
So something that I tried each year, whether or not it was successful, I don't know. If you have updates, send them. My rule of thumb was for the schools that I really wanted to get into, right? Like my top choices, I would send maybe 1 email a month. If I had an update, right? Like whether or not, hey, I heard back from X school, or hey, I just submitted an abstract, or I just presented, or I just published a paper, or I have a new clinical position. I'm getting more like experience, that something else to highlight that maybe you didn't have a chance to, or you couldn't put on your application before you interviewed or before your application. I think that's something that you can think about doing and organizing, maybe once a month, or depending on how close you are to the when the deadline is. I think is what you can do to sort of keep in touch with the programs. You can either email directly your interviewers. I would email my coordinator, administrator, whoever kind of organizes the actual interview day, to then send it out to the administration. And then I always included 1 to 2 sentences at the end, kind of just reaffirming why I wanted to get into the school. Little things like that, I personally think go a long way. I think it really helped me in my 3rd year applying. But those are little things you can do to kind of keep in touch, because otherwise, there's hundreds of applicants, and it does get really hard to maintain all these email communications, correspondence, just because there's so many people, and there's just such a long time between when you interview, the waiting of the wait list, and then when you actually get an acceptance and actually go. So you definitely want to try to do at least some emails just to let them know that you really want to go or are still interested.
Great, thank you. And Mari?
Yeah, I also didn't really have any further correspondences with my programs, again, because my cycle actually ended up pretty fast, surprisingly. But I think kind of to go off what Chen was saying, just to not get lost in the flow of people being applying in your cycle, I think sending in emails is important if you have updates to make. Obviously, if you don't, there's no need to annoy the administration with that. But the other thing I think, if you're able to find out, is kind of seeing the dynamic of the program. And so our program is pretty small, and our communication point person would mainly be one secretary person. And so sending an email to her, she would definitely recognize your name, and so having that recognition could be important, as opposed to I can imagine some other programs have a lot more students, a lot more I don't know how many people apply to our program, so I don't want to speak about our applicant numbers, but if there's a lot more students that are applying, it could, and they have a bigger program to deal with, a bigger department to deal with that, those communications definitely I can see being really important in making yourself stand out. But again, not flooding them with, hey, I got a 4.0 on my final class today. But things like, I published a paper, I started, I don't know what of those, but important updates are definitely important.
Great, awesome. Those are all really helpful tips. So this next question, I will just kind of open it up to anyone who would have some kind of maybe helpful advice for this. But what are some steps to take to get off my top choices wait list? So even if you haven't had personal experience, any kind of, anecdotal tips and advice that you've heard, if anyone wants to give a first shot at this.
I don't know about like getting off your waitlist, but I know that something that's really important is for medical school applications, but also especially for graduate school applications, the social outing, social aspect of it is just as important. A lot of times the students will I don't want to say judge, but it's an informal interview of sorts. So if you don't seem like you'll get along as a person socially in the program, they might not accept you for that reason, just behind the scenes. The graduate students sometimes will have a say. I know that's true for one of our programs. And so, keeping that in mind at the interview, the whole experience is the interview and not just, while you're sitting down in front of whoever is asking you questions is really important. So just keeping that in mind, all your communications and, reaching out to the community and, making those connections and having people who could maybe speak for you and vouch for you might make you stand out more.
I mean, I can comment too. Again, for your top choices, right? Just be really frank about what you want, right? Like if they really are your top choice, let them know that they are your top choice. I wouldn't recommend sending 5 schools, each one saying, "Hey, I will go if you accept me. You're my number one." You can't have 5 number ones, right? And I think generally it's kind of looked down upon because if they do offer it to you and then you decline, I think one, it takes away from other students who might actually have that as their number one. But I do generally think most school administration can kind of see through those type of emails. But just be really genuine, send them an actual update. And, of course, if you have an update and eventually, they will likely get back to you, especially for MD, PhD programs. I've found when I interviewed for MD, PhD, dual degree programs, the administration is generally a lot more willing to email you very quickly as opposed to when I did the MDs, just because the number of students interviewing is a lot more for MDs, right? So just, I recommend kind of keep persevering, send updates if you have it, and just be really frank and just open about what you want. And generally, they'll respond in kind, I found at least.
Awesome. Luke, did you have any other input for this question?
As Chen was saying, right, certainly you can send letters of interest, but also you can send letters of intent, pseudo intent, I guess in this case, basically telling programs that if they were to admit you, you would matriculate, and those can go a long way to helping your chances of getting off the wait list.
Great, awesome. So the next question, which someone has also kind of alluded to in the Q&A, is related to, are there any questions that you wish you would ask current students at schools you're considering? And kind of with that as well, kind of with questions you would ask to get a true feel for the program, whether to students, faculty, or admin. So let's start with Madi.
That's a good question. I'm trying to think. I think, besides the, why did you go here? I think one that I liked to ask was if you could go through the cycle again, what, would you choose this school or, where would you choose it? Where would you choose to go? I think was kind of one of the questions that I asked. But like I was saying, having those if you can, moments away from the not professors, but whoever is doing the interviews is really important. Because, for example, I remember I had one interview where they had like a lunch with all the students, and one of the current students told us that when interview season comes, a bunch of new students will show up on Tinder, and she'll match with all of them and tell them not to go to that school. And that obviously was a very clear sign. And so, being able to find people that look like they can, tell you how they feel and things like that are really important. And a lot of the students are really open about that.
Awesome. That's very interesting. Chen.
Sorry, I was typing to a question. Could you repeat it?
Yeah, no worries. So basically, like, what questions do you wish you had asked, like other students, faculty, admin? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of like the one that's here. So for me, not to sound kind of robotic, but I had a little script, like at least the first 3 or 4 questions, kind of to get a feel and get something going. You probably can't tell. I'm pretty shy, especially when it comes to an interview. I usually feel really uncomfortable when I'm wearing a suit or like looking nice. I'm usually in a sweatshirt, right? So I always start with, what do you really like about the program? Or if there's something that's not on the website that you really want to highlight, I would love to hear it, right? And generally, whoever's interviewing really loves the program. And so they're going to tell you a bunch of great stuff, things that you might not have heard from other students because they're not, they haven't finished, or you might not have found on their website, right? There's a lot of like actual like behind the scenes stuff that goes on in the program that you might not see just from the website. If you're interviewing with students, I always used to ask like, oh, how close are you with like older students and students in your class? Do you find that you guys tend to like really like get along, or do you guys like do social things? How are your actual like meetings? Are you guys willing to share your research and get feedback from others? And generally, students really like to talk about that. You could also ask about the research that your interviewer does, or the student, little things to kind of get the conversation going. And then after I got that formality out, then I would ask more like I guess informal questions about the social environment, like, oh, how do you like living? When I was in Chicago, I was like, oh, how do you like living in Chicago? When I interviewed at Penn, I was like, oh, how do you like Philadelphia, like living here? Right, because these dual degree programs are 8 years, right? So it's not really just, oh, I'm here for school. You're here for almost a decade, right? So you really want to know if you're going to enjoy living in the city or the neighborhood. And there's no one better to get a objective opinion than from students who actively decided to choose to come here. And generally, when you ask those type of questions, at least when I've done interviews, I feel that the applicant is really actually trying to get a gauge of not just the school. Education doesn't really change that much, but the environment is just so different between schools. And I would always feel that the interviewee was actually really trying to like get a glimpse of that. And so those are little things I think that can set you apart.
Great, awesome. And Luke?
One question that I think can be particularly informative is just to ask them what they do for fun. That will tell you a lot about the surrounding neighborhood, basically if they have free time or not, especially if they're in the medical school phase of their training. Beyond that, one question that I also enjoyed asking was, especially to faculty members, was about the ease of doing research. That makes sense. Basically, how accessible are services like cores, course for sequencing, basically all the logistics of science that you might take for granted, but can play a limiting role in your research. How easily are those tasks accomplished at the institution?
Awesome. Those are all very great questions. So this next one is also one that I'll just offer to the whole group. But what is the difference between a letter of intent and letter of interest, and when should you send them, / what's kind of the timeline there? So if anyone has any experience with sending those, feel free to take this.
Well, I'm not a panelist, but I can jump in really quickly. The difference between the letter of intent and letter of interest really boils down to letter of intent. You just want to send it to one school and one school only. That's your top, absolute top choice. Letter of interest, on the other hand, you can send it to multiple schools to let them know that you'll be interested in going there. And it is really, really important to make sure that you don't send multiple letter of intents to multiple schools. The reason is, talked to a program director when I was applying. He said that program directors talk to one another frequently, and they might be like, "Oh, Jeff from this school sent me a letter of intent." They might be, and if you send another letter of intent to another school and they might be talking, they might say, "Oh, he sent us a letter of intent too," and it might really look bad on you. So that's the difference. And I would really send them once you know like which school you really want to go to. And I think for letter of interest, I think it's better to send them off early as possible. So whenever the schools give you back, if that you got waitlisted, it's better to send a letter of interest early, and combine with that letter of interest, you want to provide an update, right? So if you have an update, make sure you attach the update to the letter of interest. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so moving on to the next question. So due to COVID, it's hard to do second visits, second looks. So do you have any advice on choosing the best program based on virtual revisits? And we'll start with Luke.
Sure. So I would say that the number one thing you can do is really just to get to know some of the current students a bit more. I mean, they're the people who have boots on the ground. They're the most familiar with the day-to-day sort of experience of being in the program. And if you're able to get a good vibe from those people, I would say that, that's generally speaks pretty well about the program. Otherwise, certainly connecting with the program directors can be helpful. You get a sense of how supportive they are, how involved they can potentially be, if that's something that you're looking for. And otherwise, really just potentially also looking at faculty members with whom you'd like to do research. If you are able to compile a pretty extensive list just from faculty pages, then I think that also speaks pretty well about your sort of chances of landing a project that you are really interested in during the graduate phase.
So, Mari?
Just to comment off that last comment about getting to know your graduate advisors, I think that if you haven't done so already, I think that is probably the most important thing you can do probably in terms of admissions to the graduate program, which can sometimes really hinder your admissions to a dual degree program. Because for me, my undergrad professor who ended up becoming my advisor was my number one advocate, because he was sitting on that admissions council, and there's somebody there to say, hey, I'll take that student. And that can be huge. So making those connections, and even getting, if you can, touring labs, talking to professors, potential PIs, and seeing if you'd be a good fit in that lab is really, really important. And on the other side, though, you don't necessarily need to parrot out their research project as your research interest, because that happened in one of my cohort group interview groups as well, where we were doing some research labs, and they were, they all asked what you're interested in, and she just said the exact thing of the lab we were touring. It was really weird. So don't be afraid to be yourself, and have your own personality that's going to make you shine in the application cycle for sure.
Awesome, that's very helpful. Finally, Chen.
So yeah, it's really hard because everything's virtual. You don't get a good feel of the environment, and you can only tell so much about a place or a person through a screen. So I recommend, if you have time, to travel at least to the location for a day. And then, of course, I know that's not really possible for a lot of people. Another one would be, email student interviewers or students who are willing to like meet with you via Zoom in a more informal space, or like a phone call. I know a few of my friends and I, for I guess this past cycle, like we left our emails out and we were like, hey, if you ever want to like reach out and talk, where you're definitely not under scrutiny, right? Like the whole interview day, they say we're not grading you when you're walking to and from places. That's somewhat true, but also, you're still kind of under the watchful eye of the interview, right? So if you can find someone to talk to outside of the interview, really informal, just ask them like stuff about the program, the environment, the social life, different research projects that are going on, where it's not really under the guise of performing for an interview. I think you can get a much better feel, a more, what's the word I'm looking for, like natural, a natural feel for the environment. I think that can go a long way in helping you choose a place, especially if you can't visit. Especially since interviews now are really virtual. You could probably go through like 3 interviews in one day, depending on like, the timing of it. So little things like that can kind of push one program over another or give you more insight into the actual environment. So.
Yeah, it's super helpful. Your dog is very cute. Okay, moving on to the next question. So, okay, this is kind of, this can be kind of a broad answer as well, but what do you think would be good to prioritize in choosing a school, specifically if you're kind of comparing medical school programs or PhD programs, like the different parts of a dual degree? So let's start with Luke.
So I think to a large extent, the medical training you will receive is going to be very identical at many institutions. And I think I was alluding to this earlier, where if you have a specific research niche that you want to pursue, it is vital that you are able to find faculty members who can support you on that journey. And obviously that can be very institution dependent. And so one thing that I heavily considered in selecting my current institution was whether or not I could perform the research that I, was interested in. And for me, honestly, the medical aspect, I really thought at a certain level, the schools do tend to be, quite similar.
Um, Sorry, I didn't mean to just jump in, but I was kind of actually disagree a little bit. I think that medical school curriculums can be different for individuals because there's programs that do more self-oriented learning, and there's programs that do much more, professor lectures, traditional style learning. And I think MSU actually is a really good example of that because we have colleges that do both. The CHM program, the human medicine program, does actually doesn't have any exams. They don't do examinations, and they do almost all like group and case-based studies. Apparently, I'm not entirely sure, but that's not the case for us at all. And so that's definitely something to consider. And I think if you are a student who's applying who doesn't have as clear of an idea what you want to do for research, kind of balancing those interests in maybe what you're wanting to do in the future, as well as exploring the graduate program and seeing, what kind of allowance it gives you to explore research, I think is really important. For our program, for example, we have a 3-month period in the summer where you just explore labs. So if you don't know what you want to do, you have paid time to kind of just explore research before you start classes. So I think that's something that can be beneficial for some students, especially if you don't know what you want to do as specifically.
Awesome. And Chen, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I'm kind of like in between Luke and Mari. Hopefully I said the name right. I don't know. I'm also like, to be frank, I'm a little jaded, but yeah, I personally like for me, I just think medical school education is medical school education. The curriculum's different, right? It's going to be different for each school and whatnot. But at the end of the day, you're going to learn probably like Luke and I probably and Mari all probably we'll learn the same things through our first and second years, right? Because all of it is geared towards, can we pass that initial step one exam, right? Which thankfully now is just pass fail, right? But it's all the same content with a few differences here and there. But overall, it's the same, right? So I looked at it in terms of, well, what's the curriculum going to do for me, right? So I liked UIC because it was one of the schools that said, okay, a week before your exam, no classes, nothing mandatory. You get 5 unadulterated days to study. And I was like, oh, that's great. I'm going to learn entire cardiology in 1 week or something like that, right? Other schools, my friend Jennifer, who was at Duke, they have exams like every 2 to 3 weeks. But their exams is passing grade is like 50%. And she was like, well, that's perfect for me. And their exams are only 50 questions, right? And so it depends on what you want in a curriculum, which is kind of like what Mario is saying. But at the same time, with what Luke's saying, medical education is not going to drastically change. I mean, maybe for you guys, there'll be a brand new section on like COVID and aerosolized like viral infections. But overall, the medical education is not going to be drastically too different. So really pay attention to what the curriculum, offers you. And then for the PhD years, it's exactly what Luke was saying, right? Like you might go to this really prestigious school, but just no one's research really like is what you want to do. And is that really worth it for you? For 4 years, you're in a lab doing work that, you enjoy, but it's not like the work that you really wanted to do, like why you applied for an MD PhD. And that's kind of, why I also ended up choosing UIC was there was an expert in wound healing. And I really wanted to do wound regeneration, wound healing. And there were a few other labs at other institutions that had it. But just when I asked around, my current mentor, her like pedigree of mentoring and the work that she explicitly in the models she used really spoke to me. And so that's why I ended up choosing, my medical school and my current mentor. And so, I know it's kind of like easy for me to say because I'm already in medical school, but, at the same time, while they're choosing you, you're choosing them, right? This is the like once in a lifetime chance where, you get to choose where you want to go. You kind of get to set yourself up to what you want to do medical school and what you want to do your research in and everything else, right? So you should choose something that makes you really happy. And I know, oh, you're already in medical school, like you're not applying. It's hard to say that. And, I recognize that because all my older friends were saying the same thing, but it really is true to a certain degree, right? Choose what makes you happy and choose the curriculum and the research that really resonates with you, because this is 8 years. It's a very long 8 years. I mean, it goes by, but this is a significant portion of your life. And so you really want to choose something that will make you happy. And when you finish, you're going to say, wow, I wish I could have been here longer. Well, I'll see if I'll say that, but
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Just to add one last thing, I think the grading scheme that the medical school uses can also be a pretty important factor. I know some schools they assign GPAs to their preclinical students, which I would just be wary of schools that that might foster a sort of competitive attitude within those schools. That's something that I've definitely heard of.
Yeah, and that's also a great question as well to ask current students how they feel about their curriculum. Okay, this is a more specific question, but is also very important in making this decision. And so when we're thinking about the stipend for MD and DO PhD programs, they're relatively the same, but how much did the stipend play a factor in choosing a program? And also, have you found the stipend to be sufficient in living as a MD or DO PhD student? So let's start with Mari for this one.
I think I'm gonna have the best answer to that because I live in pretty rural Michigan, so I can live off my stipend just fine. And actually, for me, I didn't apply to very many dual programs. I kind of had a weird path to this program where I actually was a neuroscience background and was heavily debating whether I wanted to do neuroscience research or go into clinical medicine. And then I took one anthropology class in my final semester right before I graduated and decided that's what I wanted to do. I'd always loved research, but there was something missing about lab medicine, lab research that I'd always kind of felt disconnected from people. And so when I found the program, and the reason I'm saying this is because it kind of, in terms of the stipend, it was for me a situation of no stipend versus stipend. It wasn't really comparing stipend situations because I didn't apply to very many dual programs. So, I mean, it wasn't that big of a factor. It was definitely a, oh, that's nice kind of thing. But it was a little bit of a different situation for me.
Awesome. And Chen?
So I guess long story short, I actually did not know dual degree programs had a stipend when I applied. Yeah, and to go even further back, I didn't actually know like MSTPs or dual degree programs funded, all that were like a funded thing. I just thought it was you just get both. So for me, when I found out I was getting money on my interview day, I was like, oh, this is great. Like any money is better than no. Now I laugh because now that I've been in Chicago for a few years, it's pretty hard to live on you know, the stipend you get, but you can definitely get by. I mean, it's better than taking out loans for medical school debt, especially if you're out of state. It's better than not having any money. And generally they do adjust it for, you know, the city, like, or where you live. So for mine, every year they like increase it by a couple hundred a month. It ends up being like an extra like 1,000 to 2,000 a year to kind of adjust for some inflation. So with that, right, my stipend right now and Jeff's as well, because we're in the same program, it's around 35,000 a year. Comes out to around after taxes like 2,700 a month or so. That so far has been enough for me to get like an okay size 1 bedroom apartment, have a dog, and groceries. I don't live a lavish lifestyle, but you know, it's certainly enough to get you by. But I wouldn't expect like, oh, I'm gonna have enough money. I can get a nice 1 bedroom apartment on the top floor. I can get a penthouse. I'm gonna go out to like this fancy restaurant every weekend. You definitely don't have enough money for that, but you have enough money to get, you know, your basic groceries, a living situation set up, and whatnot.
Awesome. And Luke?
Yeah, just to reiterate what Chen said, I think the programs generally do adjust the stipend level based on the cost of living in the area. And so in New York, it is, you know, things can be quite pricey, but generally the institutions also offer housing to the students. And so that tends to be, you know, I think from what I've heard, Cornell and Columbia both offer apartments basically at around like 1,200-ish a month, which isn't terrible. And at that level, I think most people are like living acceptably well.
Great. Thanks for all your answers. And so this next question goes back to kind of talking about wait lists. And so I'll open this up to everyone, but if anyone can kind of talk about the timeline that people should expect if they're on a wait list or multiple wait lists, and when does a wait list movement tend to happen? So I'll open this up to anyone who has some insight.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so when do wait lists tend to start moving?
I think it depends on the program and at the rate at which they're currently accepting students. So from personal experience, I was waitlisted as early as like January, December, depending on, if you interview early, you get waitlisted early. Kind of rough estimate. Then depending on how many students in the first or second wave of acceptances actually, accept, um, then depending on that, that kind of gives you a trajectory of when they might really like start taking people off the wait list. So if a lot of people end up saying, oh, like, no, I got into another school, then they keep going, then they can get the wait list. And I've had friends and myself get off wait lists as early as March or April. In other schools, they just never let me know. I mean, I got kicked off a wait list in August when I already started at UIC, because sometimes they're just that backed up. So unfortunately, there's not really a clear timeline. The only thing that you can really do is like what, we've kind of said before, send them the updates, let them know, hey, like I'm on the wait list, I really want to come here, or I'm really interested. And, generally they'll take that into account and they'll get back to you when they can. I will say for like MD, PhD, DO PhDs, they're really much better about, emailing you about the wait list because there's only a limited number of applicants. So it's not like they just completely forgot about it. So, if you email them, they will let you know like, hey, we haven't made any decisions yet, or they'll say, hey, we just started giving out the round of acceptances. You might be able to hear back in a month. Generally, they're really, really good about this open communication, which sometimes you don't necessarily see if you're just doing an MD interview. And I'm not saying that to knock on just the MDs, but just because they have like tens more applicants, right? So it's a little harder to keep track of all this.
Yeah, just to go off of that, I remember our program kind of sends out all the dual degree program applicants at the same, or the acceptances at the same time. I think it was, they told us late April, but it like you would know by a late April. So they actually did tell us when we would kind of hear by, but they let us know earlier. So we got our letters are sent out early April, I think late March-ish. But they kind of do have to, at least for us, coordinate with the graduate program. So a lot of times actually that's what they're waiting on, as opposed to the medical acceptance. But that's our school's case. They really end up waiting for the biomedical graduate program, the BMS program, to hear back before they can send out anything. So there's a little bit of logistics involved.
Awesome. Those were all very helpful. Okay, and then just wanting to address one more question in the Q&A. So how do you learn more about a school without being able to attend the revisit if you're on the wait list? So I see Chen's answered it in the Q&A, but do you have anything more that you want to expand on?
I can comment a little bit. At least our school has a current students list. It's currently being updated at least, but it's listed, we have them by year, we have it by specialty, interests, research, things like that. And so looking at those lists if they're available and contacting specific students that maybe are doing the program that you want, the interest that you want, the area that you are interested in, could be really helpful, because I know a lot of our students really love having people who are interested reaching out, people who are potential underclassmen reaching out. We really don't mind at all. So please feel free to look into those lists and reach out to, anybody you think might be similar in terms of your interests and goals potentially.
Yeah, just to add on, I definitely agree with exactly what Mari just said. You can search up the names, email them. There's one thing I've learned, dual degree students love, hyping up their own school because, we picked it for a reason, right? So we like, as much as I have personal gripes with some of the stuff that happens, if someone asks me, what do you like most about UIC? I could talk to you for like, half a day, right? And generally most students, right, are more than happy to give you insight into the program, the living environment, details maybe you didn't even want to know, that you didn't even think of. Like, definitely reach out. I don't know. I feel like I'm speaking for all of us here, but we love talking to applicants and like people who are generally interested in dual degree programs and coming to our program. Like, send us an email. Like, everyone wants to talk.
Yeah, I can definitely support what Chen is saying. We're always receptive to questions, and we take a lot of pride in our own institutions. So definitely feel free to reach out with any thoughts that you might have.
Awesome. And so as we're wrapping up, I just wanted to kind of ask, oh, okay, maybe if someone wants to address the Q&A question. Okay, but just for the purposes of wrapping up this session, if anyone wants to just kind of offer, maybe just a sentence or two of just like a general point of advice about choosing a program, finding the best fit, anything like that. So let's start with Chen.
So I'll try to give some general advice and then also advice in that last part of the question. One thing is, you guys keep your heads up. It's a really long journey. I realized there was a lot of like waitlist questions and stuff, but it gets better. The waiting is honestly the hardest part. But you guys will get an answer. Just keep persevering, and it's 100% worth it, despite what my friends say about how I feel. It's awesome. Keep your heads up, and just keep persevering. And then for like actual application stuff and waitlist, again, we kind of like said it a lot, but really make your intentions very clear. I really do believe administration and programs really like value honesty, right? You don't want to be sending out 5 letters of intent, because if you're telling 5 schools that you're going to go there because they're your number one, they will know. They do talk, right? Program directors meet. Pretty much everyone knows who's applying where to some degree, right? So just be really honest, give honest updates. Obviously hype yourself up, but not to the point where you're clearly exaggerating, right? I think most programs and most students and interviewers really, really like honesty and genuine, like student like feedback and communication. And so that's really my advice. And I found that when I did that, I got really good receptive emails. It became really clear, like, hey, we thought you were a good applicant, but we already gave out all our acceptances. Try another school. And wasn't the answer I was looking for many of the times, but at least, they let you know, and then you can go, okay, the next school, like my second top choice, let's go all in on that. Okay, third top choice, so on. And things like that, I think, while some of the answers, again, are not the best that you want to hear, they do give you direction on where you should focus your time and energy and things like that, especially if you have multiple schools that, you're on their wait list, or you really like 3 or 4 programs.
Awesome. And Luke?
Yeah, honestly, I think Chen provided a perfect summary of how to approach this whole situation. Really clear communication is the name of the game here, and it can go a long way in terms of sort of pushing you past the precipice into the world of acceptance beyond the waitlist.
Great. And finally, Mari.
Yeah, kind of going along those lines, I think something that Chen said that really struck with me was kind of going in with like a twinkle in your eye in your interview, like you're excited to be there, you want to learn more. It's an opportunity to be there, and interviews are really, really fun, right? And obviously you kind of get dragged down and sad when you're waiting for, maybe you're on the wait list and you're just waiting and waiting, but having that enthusiasm, they can sense that for sure, and so that's really important. And then just in terms more generally, commenting on kind of choosing a program that's a good fit. I know there's a lot of comments about MD versus DO, but for me, I think the idea of the program being a really good fit in the philosophy and the mission statement was really important. And something that's really cool with the DO program is we do OMM in the first semester, and as a theory, it's kind of interesting. It's like a massage with purpose is, my professors hate when I say that, but I think it's nice. It's kind of like a chiropractor. It's a mix of chiropractor and, it's really interesting. It's a lot of both bone and muscle movement, but it's cool because you actually get to apply the knowledge that you learned in the summer in anatomy directly on someone's body and think about, okay, let's think about these muscle layers. Let's think about how these attachments are moving. And then you learn about how they move and how you can make people feel better. So it's really cool just thinking about how, one, just the philosophy of, medicine not just being prescribing pills or telling people, oh, hey, you're sick, let's do this. But you're having that connection, having that communication, having that healing touch is really emphasized at our school. And so that was really, really important to me, that whole philosophy. And it also goes along really well with my research interest, which is heavily into more holistic approaches to health and how people's wellness and health are impacted by things just other than, what they eat or, drugs and just general health and biochemical mechanisms. So those kinds of fits for the program, I think, are really important. And to that extent, for me, it was a little bit of a gut feeling, but there's lots and lots of aspects that can feed into it. And just knowing yourself and knowing the program is super important.
Awesome. Those are all amazing points of advice. And thank you all for all of your answers throughout this whole panel. And thank you to all of the attendees for joining us for our Q&A session today. I want to thank our panelists for their time. Oh, sorry. I want to thank our panelists for their time, the participants who made the session very interactive, and many people, including the APSA Diversity Ad Hoc PR Partnerships Committees, Gabby, Stephen, and APSA leadership that not only put these sessions together, but work to make sure the UIM applicants receive word of it as well. This is one of our last interactive sessions of this academic year. We hope that these sessions have been helpful, and please look forward to upcoming sessions in the next year. And stay tuned via social media and look out for emails. And yeah, so thank you everyone, and hope everyone has a good night. Bye.